Hello everybody and welcome back to the HLTCO YouTube channel. The subject of today's video is quite a controversial one. I think it's fair to say. It concerns Mason Greenwood and the potential for Manchester United to bring him back into their first team squad. This comes after a statement which was released by Manchester United yesterday concerning an internal investigation that had been taking place regarding Mason Greenwood and whether or not they feel it was appropriate for him to be part of the Manchester United squad moving forward. I think it's a story which has been played out in the public domain for the most part over the last year or so, because of the release of an audio file, a conversation between Mason Greenwood and his then girlfriend. I won't go into it verbatim because, to be quite honest, the contents of that conversation are extremely grim, and I don't particularly want to repeat the words. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about if you are watching this video, but if you are somehow unaware of that conversation, I'm sure within 20 or 30 seconds of a quick Google search you can find it for yourselves. But that, I suppose, creates this powder keg situation regarding Mason Greenwood and his potential return to the Manchester United squad, because technically, via a legal route, there is nothing stopping Manchester United from putting him back into the team. You know, all charges against him have been dropped. The specific way in which they were dropped and the reasons for it are the subject of conjecture and a great deal of controversy. But either way, we find ourselves in a situation where Manchester United are clearly trying to work out how to potentially get Mason Greenwood back into this team and smooth it over for the most part. I just don't personally, from an individual level, believe there is any way that Manchester United can do this. I don't think there is any scenario in which it works. I don't think you're going to get buy-in from Manchester United's fans. I don't think you're going to be allowed to do it from a neutral perspective. I think every time he goes to an away ground, he is going to get roundly abused for the entirety of his time on the pitch or even on the bench. I don't think this is a situation or a scenario that I can ever really remember, because of course there have been high profile cases in the past where players have been accused of rape and the case has been there for everyone to sort of discuss. But because of the presence of this audio file, because so many people have heard it across social media, across WhatsApp groups, across people sharing it with them from day to day, it has a very visceral feel to it. And the mere fact that the charges have been dropped in a formal legal setting does not mean that football fans will forget, or indeed the players that are coming up against Mason Greenwood week after week. And it's been quite an interesting aspect to it. If you look at the online response to the Mason Greenwood saga, I think a fair chunk of Manchester United's online fan base have not necessarily been celebrating it, but have been very much behind the idea of bringing Mason Greenwood back in. But if you also look at the match-going centre of Manchester United's core support, the people that are there at Old Trafford week after week, the people that follow them up and down the country and pack out away ends, I haven't seen a single voice from anyone that attends Manchester United games regularly who wants him anywhere near the club. And with that in mind, it's a PR disaster. You know, it's the equivalent of Manchester United throwing a grenade into a room and shutting all the doors. I cannot see a scenario where their shareholders, the people that advertise with them, the entire Premier League product is going to be best served by Mason Greenwood coming back into Manchester United. And with all of that in mind, I'm just a bit baffled as to why they're even attempting to do it in the first place. I understand it from an employment law perspective, but you know, there have been stories over the last few days in which they've said they've conducted an internal investigation, they were going to consult the women's team, and for me, you know, that was the equivalent of them putting up a human shield and saying, well, the women's team are okay with it as a potential, when really, I think everyone can see through it immediately. This is a case of Manchester United wanting an extremely talented young footballer that prior to this whole thing unfolding in a public setting was deemed to be one of England's greatest hopes. But some things simply are bigger than football, and I do not for the life of me believe that Mason Greenwood can ever play an active role in Manchester United's squad without their own supporters having a major problem with it, and without every single fan of another team that he comes up against wanting to roundly abuse him for 90 minutes. And as I said, in a legal setting, the charges have been formally dropped, but that doesn't mean that people will forget it. I will just read the statement out for you now. Apologies for the top of my bald head clouding the camera, but I think it's important that we do go through the statement itself and what Manchester United have said specifically. They said, following the dropping of all charges against Mason Greenwood in February of 2023, Manchester United have conducted a thorough investigation into the allegations made against him. This has been drawn on extensive evidence and context not in the public domain, and we have heard from numerous people with direct involvement or knowledge of the case. Throughout the process, the welfare and perspective of the alleged victim has been central to the club's inquiries, and we respect her right to lifelong anonymity. We also have the responsibility to Mason as an employee, as a young person who has been with the club since the age of 7 and as a new father and with a partner. The fact-finding phase of our investigation is now complete, and we are in the final stages of making a decision on Mason's future. Contrary to media speculation, that decision has not yet been made and is currently the subject of intensive internal deliberation. Responsibility ultimately rests with the Chief Executive Officer. Once made, the decision will be communicated and explained for the club's internal and external stakeholders. This has been a difficult case for everyone associated with Manchester United, and we understand the strong opinions it has provoked based on the partial evidence in the public domain. We ask for patience as we work through the final stages of this carefully considered process. And I think, there are parts of that statement which are doing incredibly heavy lifting. Of course, I'm recording this YouTube video only having been given the partial evidence rather than the full picture, as Manchester United want to sort of spin it in that particular statement. But even the line there about it being a difficult case for everyone associated with Manchester United, surely this should be more about the person involved. And I suppose that's where the hot potato nature of this subject really takes off, because if you look at the alleged victim in all of this, she is currently, with Mason Greenwood, with child, and seemingly happy in their little bubble. And obviously you've got millions of people, myself included, passing comment on this, when the victim herself is front and centre of it and still technically with Mason Greenwood in a relationship. So I just find the whole thing incredible for a number of different reasons. But if you look at it from a purely footballing perspective, I just cannot for the life of me work out how Manchester United expect to play this in the long term. I don't think it's going to work. I think you are probably going to find a situation where if they do bring him back in, they face a huge amount of blowback publicly. The PR will be absolutely terrible. They probably won't be able to get him up to speed match fitness wise for a number of weeks, if not months. And after 2 or 3 weeks of the Mason Greenwood circus really taking centre stage and it damaging their brand to such an extreme level, I would expect they will look to sell him off to a different league, look to sort of cut ties with it. But I just can't understand why they can't see the wood for the trees on this. I don't imagine there is a single match-going Manchester United fan that is happy about the idea of Mason Greenwood coming back in. I've canvassed opinion pretty widely on my social media channels, albeit it's a tiny little snapshot of the available Manchester United match-going fan base. But as I said, I haven't seen a single individual say they would be happy to have Mason Greenwood back in their squad, and I don't blame them at all. I think this is genuinely a subject that is bigger than football. It's one of the most controversial things I can remember happening. The fact that Manchester United are even trying to provide something of a soft landing for Mason Greenwood and their football club is beggars belief. And I do genuinely believe, regardless of how you might want to spin it in terms of employment law, that if it was a player who was nowhere near as talented, who had nowhere near as high a ceiling, they would have cut ties with him immediately. It wouldn't even have been a discussion about rehab, about a period of contemplation, about a potential public interview, about this long-winded statement about them trying to bring the women's team on board to see what their opinion on it is. It would have just been a case of cut and dried. Manchester United want nothing more to do with you, and as far as we're concerned, we've erased you from our history. But Mason Greenwood's footballing ability, I believe, is the reason this has dragged on, and it's the reason Manchester United are still trying to work out a way of getting him back into the first team squad without the level of blowback that is inevitable given the strength of emotion and feeling across the entire game, not just from neutral fans and rivals, but from Manchester United fans as well. So I just wanted to give my perspective on it for YouTube this morning. Apologies if I've got on a little bit of a soapbox with it, but I do genuinely feel very strongly about this, because it's not about a Manchester United player. It's about an individual who has had a conversation with his then girlfriend, which I found repulsive, millions of others found repulsive, and as far as I'm concerned, any sane human being would. And yet we are talking about him coming back into one of the most high-profile clubs in world football, in the most high-profile league, purely because of his footballing ability, rather than the integrity of the situation. And I just think it's absolutely shameful. So I will sign off there for this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed my perspective. If you have, please do consider commenting on the video, giving the video a like, and potentially pushing subscribe on the channel as well, because it does help me grow completely. And other than that, I will see you again soon. Cheers.